Hi, I'm Liz Loza, and this is Facts versus Feelings, your amuse-bouche to fantasy focus. We are bringing more fantasy, more facts, more feelings, and of course, more fun. And now that I have your attention, today's fact is that mistakes are fine as long as we learn from them. Producer Presley is here because what is Facts versus Feelings without a little lock, stock, from a smoking control room?
Wow.
Did you get
wow,
that?
Liz. I do get that reference, and that's one
Thank
hell of
you.
an intro. I don't think I deserve that intro.
Probably
but it's
not.
good to be back. Week one's in the rear view. Thank God. A lot of mistakes made on my part
Okay,
in week
so wait.
one.
Speaking of mistakes then, what is the biggest mistake you've ever made, Ben, in week one
Okay.
and in
Definitely.
fantasy?
Yeah, fantasy therapy's for later. We don't need to be going into my life mistakes. But fantasy mistakes.
Well, that
week
could be
one.
fun.
Yeah, not for this episode. That's a different podcast. Week one fantasy mistake this week. I think the biggest one, actually, there's two. One, I left Keon Coleman on the bench, but I think that was a valid decision. I had other people ranked higher that I played, and they just didn't perform. We had a lot of studs turn into duds this week. I did switch out a couple QBs for Trevor Lawrence because I've been, I trusted Joey. Joey, if you're listening, I jumped on
Joey
board,
Wright.
man. Joey Wright. Get back to that episode, hot take, that Trevor was going to be it. And in week one, he was not it.
All right, well, we don't love that, but what we do love is when people like and subscribe to this
We do
video.
love
So
that.
please, if you're watching, make sure you go ahead and do that. And if you have questions, if you need to work things out, if you want to learn and maybe discuss your mistakes, since Dave is so reticent to talk about the breadth of his, you can go ahead and leave us a voicemail. Can you tell them the number? Because I can never remember it.
Yeah, sure. I can definitely do that. You remember? 914-348-1893.
1893.
There we
Nailed
go.
it. Hit the disclaimer.
Fantasy football is a game of inches, luck, and irrational confidence. Proceed with caution, trust your gut, and remember, side effects of listening to this podcast may include spontaneous victory dances, mild trash talking, and the belief that your sleeper pick is better than everyone else's. Take the facts of fantasy football seriously, but consult your feelings before making any lineup changes.
When I'm wrong, I say I'm wrong.
I wasn't the only one that made a mistake in week one, Liz. I think the entire industry made some mistakes in this preseason and in week one rankings. Some studs, some duds, and one of those players that I think we need to talk about, you already have listed here, and that's Justin Herbert.
Yes, because I don't think we made a mistake about Justin Herbert's talent. We made a mistake about his utilization. We believed that Jim Harbaugh would stick to this run-focused mentality, and instead, maybe this is evidence that people can change. He let his big-armed quarterback absolutely sling it. The Chargers managed a pass rate of 69%, the sixth highest in the NFL in week one. Here's an interesting nugget. The Chargers were the only team in the top 9 that won their game. The other 8 teams were all trailing, and so they were naturally passing more. That is an incredible harbinger of possible things to come. But it's not just that Herbert only did it with his arm. He also showed off his mobility. He had 7 rushes for 32 rushing yards. He is undoubtedly the engine of the Bolts offense, moving him from low-end QB1 territory into a top 10 starter in week 2.
Well, a running back that I think we all underestimated heading into week one, Liz, is one Mr. Breece Hall.
I completely agree with you. I myself overcorrected on this one, and I have to own my mistakes, so I'm saying it out loud. But the claims of his bust potential were wildly overstated because I think we all failed to recognize his skill set. We know him to be a diverse and versatile player. This was a high draft pick a couple of years ago. And so when we look at what he did on the ground, a snap share of 59% as compared to Braylon Allen's 30% or Isaiah Davis's 13%. But he didn't just produce on the ground. He was also very active in the passing game. Second in team targets with 4 looks. We're talking about 21 total touches. So the volume was there, but he also was efficient. And that is what I love to see, particularly when he now has a mobile quarterback, 5.6 yards per carry. And so the assumption now is that Fields is opening up lanes for Hall as he is also involved in the passing game. This makes Hall, now obviously big ifs, right? Because can the Jets offense keep this going? Can it stay, is the engine in New York going to stay humming? I'm not quite sure, but we do know that Hall, based on his skill set, probably isn't going to be like a top 5 to 10 producer, but he is absolutely now a solid RB2 moving forward.
Well, I want to move on and talk about a player that should be finishing in the top 5 of this position, and that is Brian Thomas Jr., who stunk it up in Week 1, Liz.
Yeah, one catch for 11 yards looks terrible because it is terrible. But if we pull out, there are some reasons for optimism. Number one, Brian Thomas Jr. drew 7 targets to Travis Hunter's 8, and he did that in a game in which the Jaguars didn't have much of a need to push the ball downfield. Also, he did save his day with a touchdown on an end around, and that play shows me that Liam Cohen is very interested in getting the ball in Brian Thomas Jr.'s hands and also staying creative with his usage. So there's he remains a focal point. That's all great. I also think this matchup really allows him to bounce back. The Bengals defense, we know, is bad. But when you look at what they did last week against the Browns, the Bengals gave up 290 passing yards. That was the 5th most to Joe Flacco in Week 1. That was so much production that 4 of the Browns receivers had 8 or more targets. So now if we are getting Brian Thomas Jr. those kind of opportunities, and we believe in Liam Cohen, which I do, hopefully Trevor Lawrence's efficiency can improve. And so I am sticking with him and have Brian Thomas Jr. ranked as my wide receiver 8 heading into Week 2.
You heard it here first, people. Brian Thomas Jr. bounce
Probably
back.
Not. Coming up, a guest who lives in the facts of fantasy football, but we're going to try and unlock a few feels. You've probably seen him on FTN Fantasy or heard him on SiriusXM. It is the one and only Jeff Ratcliffe. Stay tuned. Hello?
Hey, Liz.
Hello, is this Jeff Ratcliffe, fantasy football superstar, analyst for FTN Fantasy, and radio host on SiriusXM?
I mean, I guess the one and only. That's quite a long list of things. I'm just a Jeff, but definitely those things I've been known to dabble with.
Just a Jeff. You're also a proud girl dad and golf enthusiast. Wait, I have to ask though, have you done the Angry Birds golf thing at Topgolf yet?
100%. And also the Sonic the Hedgehog thing there, too. We're big Sonic the Hedgehog fans.
I love it. All right, so should we talk about some fantasy football, or do you really want to piss everyone off in the comments and go on a tangent about gamifying golf?
Well, I already do that enough on my radio show 5 days a week, talking about sneakers, beer, music, movies, so probably should stick to football, right?
All right, let's do it. We are talking about miscalculations. They are human, obviously. I know that you like to consider yourself fairly, quote, robotic, though I've met you in person plenty of times, and you bring all of the feels regularly, so don't sell yourself short. I am curious, though, if there was a miscalculation that you personally would like to own that came out of Week 1, that you made ahead of Week 1 and would like to own coming out of Week 1, and maybe the feelings you had about it.
I mean, honestly, I had a couple, but probably the
did.
biggest one for me was the idea that Trevor Lawrence was actually going to be a thing in Week 1. It seemed like it was going to work. It was the Carolina Panthers. On paper, the worst defense in the NFL. Liam Cohen, all the weapons. And what we instead got was just Travis Etienne, so much so that Tank Bigsby ultimately was traded after the fact. So I felt bad about that one. And then there was one other one, and the SiriusXM listeners will know where I'm going with this one. I went through a game preview, and I was talking about the Chargers, and I went, I'm interested, obviously, in Ladd McConkey, and we'll see what happens with rookie Trey Harris, and hey, Keenan Allen's there, and then I just moved on. And somebody hit up on Twitter and said, well, what about Quentin Johnston? And my response, and I quote, was, Quentin Johnston? Yeah, okay. And, of course, Quentin Johnston scores 2 touchdowns in the game. My mentions are blowing up. He's one of the top waiver ads of the week. So there you go. I was wrong on Quentin Johnston in Week 1.
Quick follow-up, Trevor Lawrence, do you think that maybe, it was a weird game, right? There was the lightning delay, the rain delay, there are kinks to work out. We know that evolution is a thing and certainly appears both in football and fantasy. Do you think there's opportunity for that trajectory to improve for Trevor Lawrence? And also, you don't have to give too much on this because we'll touch on wide receivers a little bit later, but Quentin Johnston, flash or flash in the pan?
All right. Well, starting with Jacksonville, I am a huge believer in Liam Cohen. We saw what he was able to do with Baker Mayfield. He took what Dave Canales did and then layered on top of that.
Yeah.
And Baker had that incredible year last year. Liam Cohen, I mean, some people don't even realize it's just, this dude was a rock star quarterback at the college level. This guy has been a football junkie his entire life. He used to
quarterbacks coach at Brown University, baby.
Oh, there you go. And he's had stops at the college level and the pro level. Really knows how to interact with the players. And I do think it's going to take a little bit of time. I mean, Trevor Lawrence is kind of broken. I mean, Urban Meyer probably, that alone set him back several years. And then we had the predictable Doug Peterson dip. Year one's good. Year two's not as good. Year three, all right, we're done. So I think it will take some time. He has the weapons. It's not just Brian Thomas and Travis Hunter. De'Ami Brown's a good number 3. Brenton Strange is a very talented tight end. And then the running backs out of the backfield. So I think we're going to see this get better. Now, Quentin Johnston, I'm worried because I am scarred forever from that 3-drop game that happened midseason last year. He had 6 drops down the stretch, so I'd like to see him string some together before we fully buy into him as a fantasy starter.
I am in agreement with you on both of those things. I think that it is a process for Trevor Lawrence. We have all been damaged by an ex, and it took a minute for everybody to get back on their feet. But Liam Cohen, I do believe, could be a savior. And Quentin Johnston just has one of those skill sets. I think that's why he ended up being such a high draft pick, right? Because it's one of these boomer bust skill sets. So even if he does end up being a, quote, thing by the end of the season, I don't think he will be a consistent producer.
A lot of mouths to feed there as well.
Yes, and we love a veteran resurgence in Keenan Allen. But I am getting ahead of myself. I want to talk about week 2 because we love to spin it forward. Is there a storyline that you think will define week 2?
So in some ways, maybe like Star Wars, we have a new hope to kick things off, and then we go to Empire, but really it's the return of the Jedi. So maybe a week early on this one. Probably should be week 3, but it's going to be week 2. It's going to be the return of the wide receivers. I got there. It took me a minute. I got there. Jamar Chase in week 1 was a disappointment. I expect the Cincinnati Bengals to bounce back in a big way. Nico Collins was a disappointment. I expect Houston to right the ship in terms of the passing game. Brian Thomas Jr., at least he scored the rushing touchdown, but the volume wasn't necessarily there. And we just talked about that Jacksonville passing game. I think they take a step forward. So all the panic after week 1 is a fantasy mirage in a lot of instances. And all that panic, I think, is going to subside after all of the action takes place this week. These guys get back on track.
I think the stars remain the stars. I love that take. Speaking of stars, though, George Kittle, obviously a giant star at the position, out for a couple of weeks with this injury. Is there a tight end that you would like to stream, particularly in week 2? I'm not asking for, down the road or throughout the season, but if you're going to plug and play out of desperation and you need a Band-Aid in week 2, is there someone that's largely available that you would advocate for?
Well, that's the key, largely available, because if Kyle Pitts is out there, it would be Kyle Pitts. I know some people they like to avoid him, but the volume was good in week 1. The same thing with Hunter Henry, but those guys aren't very widely available. So if I had to, I am a volume chaser. I'm going to go with Juwan Johnson. I actually thought that overall, Spencer Rattler was serviceable. And that's all we kind of need in that offense. We need him to not be a disaster. We need him to not be like a Ben DiNucci out there for the Cowboys several years ago. We need him to be able to move the offense down the field and target the guys who should be targeted. And in that offense, I mean, Johnson is essentially the third target. So he would be the guy who I'd go after who's widely available.
Also, Juwan Johnson, a converted wide receiver, right? So we know he's got the hands to get the job done, not just your standard tight end. I would agree. I am a little bit wary, obviously, for good reason about that offense. And I'm not quite sure if the Juwan Johnson situation is an outlier. But I do think if you have George Kittle and you are desperate, then you can't wring your hands or get in your head about whether or not this could or couldn't happen. You just have to be decisive and move forward. And Juwan Johnson is certainly a suitable replacement for the time being. Okay, so you talked about wide receivers, and while the stars did not shine in week 1, there were a couple of, let's call them understudies, who certainly showed out. There was Kayshon Boutte and Keenan Allen, who we mentioned, Quentin Johnson, who we talked about, Cedric Tillman, Hollywood Brown. Which of those players do you feel the most confident in using moving forward? Again, we're talking about week 2. We're not talking about week 15.
Exactly, and I think that's the key point here. It's Hollywood Brown for me, and the answer is it's dependent on a few things, but obviously Rashee Rice first and foremost. When Rice comes back in week 7, remember, if you're listening right now, he's not injured. So this is not there's a slow ramp up, and then by week 10, maybe he's the same guy. He's right out there ready to roll. He looked great in the preseason. But the mystery of the Worthy injury, will he play with the brace? Will it cost him a week or two? He's not going to have surgery. He's not going to go to IR, so at least we have that. But I can't ignore 16 targets, and I can't ignore Patrick Mahomes. Like, oh, finally, okay, here's a guy who I can just pepper with targets who's not Rashee Rice or Travis Kelce. I think he's going to lean into that. I actually do have him as a wide receiver 2 this week, which is saying something. I'm not buying in on Juju Smith-Schuster, very low ceiling. Tyquan Thornton has a high ceiling, but how many balls is he going to get thrown? And they're largely just going to be downfield, right? So if it is somebody out of that group, it is Hollywood Brown.
And if you are an NFL coach or a fantasy football manager, you are looking for a vetted presence, right? And we know that Hollywood Brown has been in the league long enough to step in on a temporary basis right here. Also, the game total, the projected game total is 46.5, should be a close game with a spread of 1.5. So that means plenty of back and forth, which I agree, if you're chasing volume, and it's smart to do so because volume is king, Hollywood Brown is certainly the best, allows for the highest upside and the most guarantee in week 2. Though I have to admit, I have him as like my wide receiver 30 in that range, so I'm not in the wide receiver 2, but I appreciate the onions on that call.
Yeah, I'm being a little bit bold, but do have him just inside the top 25.
That's kind of our job. All right, give me your favorite start and sit of the week, and then we'll move to something else.
Yeah, the start goes along with our Chargers talk here. It's Justin Herbert. We weren't quite sure what to expect out of him. Ranked him just outside of the top 12 this past week. He's well inside the top 12 for me this week. They have the weapons, and that was the key. Last year it was really lackluster. Ladd McConkey was fine, but who else was catching the ball? Quentin Johnson, as we noted, wasn't consistent. If he can be consistent, great, but you have Mr. Consistency in Keenan Allen out there. You also, you have a run game that's kind of finding its footing at this point with Najee Harris still working back in and Amarian Hampton. Now, last week, fine, it was a tough matchup, but I think Herbert's going to throw and throw and throw. He's the player we saw down the stretch last season, and he is the guy that I really like here. And if you want a sit,
well, hold on. At first, I just want to thank you because I love a guest who comes on and makes me look even better than I already did in the A block. So thank you for that. I'm in agreement. Now give me your sit. Let's see if we can keep it 100.
And I was not aware of that A block. So there, great minds think alike. I'm going to probably lose plenty of followers on Twitter, but I do that regularly. Anyway, my sit is Harold Fannin. I know he's the flavor of the week. I know this is a very popular play. And hey, I really liked what we saw. We saw 12 personnel in that offense where David Njoku and Fannin were on the field for basically the whole game. So Harold Fannin was pretty much the slot wide receiver 3. I loved what he did at Bowling Green. He was wildly productive last year. I don't want to chase that, though. I want to see 2 weeks of production before we go after an unknown commodity. And largely for NFL purposes, Fannin is unknown right now. So I want to see it happen again. It's fine if we picked him up. But I had people saying, oh, I dropped David Njoku for him. It's like, dude, that's a little aggressive for my taste. I would much rather have him on a roster but not start him and still be rolling with somebody like David Njoku.
All right, now that we have settled who we should start and sit in week 2, I would like to invite you, Jeff, to put on your therapist cap and play a little fantasy therapy with me. Sound okay?
Yeah, let's do it.
This is a safe place. It's a place where we can feel free sharing our feelings.
All right, we're going to call in producer Presley to figure out the rest of this segment. But Dave, can you tell us what we're supposed to be doing now?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, after week 1, everyone was in need for a little fantasy therapy, I think. We had some studs and duds, and they were painful duds. First off, I want to thank everybody that's dialed in to the voicemail line. We'll be taking voicemails all season. Please make sure you're hitting up that number, giving us all your questions, your start, sit, really whatever you want. Any type of therapy is good here on Facts versus Feelings. The number is 914.
Any kind, Dave?
Any kind. Yeah,
Okay.
we're open
I
to
guess
it all.
any kind.
914-348-1893. And I have 3 questions for you guys today. Three voicemails, 3 people in need of some intense therapy. It was a rough week 1. And the first call we have is from Andre from Arizona. He's got some Pacheco panic.
What's up, Liz? This is Andre. Living in Arizona, I am a Chiefs fan from the beginning. Is it time to hit the panic button on Isaiah Pacheco? I know it's early, but, man, didn't look very good. Let me know.
Yeah, I think the time to hit that panic button was already last year, unfortunately. I don't know what kind of dirt Kareem Hunt has on Andy Reid, but he seems to have an affinity for the older running back. They played nearly equal snaps last week. The best runner on that team was Patrick Mahomes, which is alarming when you're not a mobile quarterback. I mean, he's mobile enough, but obviously he's not a run-first quarterback. So, yes, I have very real concerns. Pacheco has a very low ceiling. He needs to be involved in the passing game in order to raise that ceiling, and they just will not do that. So I do have concerns there. I've actually moved him down in my rankings for this week.
I have him ranked in the RB30 range. I'm not sure if I'm ready to panic because I don't mind a running back attached to Patrick Mahomes, particularly in a matchup as we just talked about, that is expected to be fairly close. Like this is a Super Bowl rematch. So I think there will be opportunities for Pacheco, but I don't think that based on what we saw in week 1, we're going to get RB2 production out of him. And I think he's now probably more of a flex. So we have to take that adjustment and use it accordingly moving forward.
Liz, Toby Parker here. Live in Georgia. Won my league last year thanks to you and the guys. Really limited in the wide receiver spot this year. Wasn't paying close attention. Went 3 running backs for my first 3 picks off the board. And it's kind of put me in a tough spot. Kind of watching the waiver wire, seeing if that's gonna do anything. But yeah, if you got any advice on that? Yeah, that'd be great.
All right, Jeff, I'm going to let you start. Interesting question. I also appreciate someone who owns their mistakes. We're talking about that throughout this episode. So, I feel like a lot of people probably did that because the wide receiver position was so theoretically deep. But now that the games have started, you're like, oh, wow, what am I going to do? Especially if you had someone like A.J. Brown who didn't produce in week 1.
Yeah, that's something to note for the future. I'm always trying to get better at this in the future. And the challenge with fantasy drafts is there's basically 365 days that take place in between a league's drafts. And there's a lot you forget over that span of time. So I made this a practice years ago to prevent myself from being dumb, which is an uphill battle on a daily basis for yours truly. But I write notes down, focus on this. So in this instance here, don't draft too many running backs early. There is a ton of depth at wide receiver, but the challenge is there isn't a lot of depth at elite receiver. And those guys do not grow on trees. And at the end of the season, it's really difficult to find somebody like that who's going to be a wide receiver 2 or better on waivers. At running back, we can do that. We can make up ground on our opponents at running back. So that's one thing. Unfortunately, right now, there aren't a lot of guys out there who we can go and pick up. So we're not going to be able to dig ourselves out of that hole. But you never know with waivers. Maybe that does change here, but it's more of a plan for the future and maybe try and make some trades.
I love that you're helping him spin this forward to next season already, but we got to help him in week 2. It's too early to give up just yet, Jeff. I think also what you're saying is like this week's waiver wire was absolutely booty cheeks. It was like maybe one of the worst waiver wires we've had to pick from. So I do think that our buddy from Georgia here, Toby, is going to be in a bit of a pickle. But if you are looking for some upside, if you are looking ahead, if you want to keep playing, you want to keep the joy alive, I don't mind Alec Manor. We talked about him last week with James Roday. I think Cam Ward played better than his stat line suggests. He did put ball on hands against a really elite defense. And Manor does seem to be emerging. We know he has a great skill set. He saw decent volume. So I think, and he's under the radar right now because he didn't flash very much in terms of numbers in week 1. So I think he is someone that might be brought along and could surprise and emerge down the stretch. Dave, who do we have next?
Hey, Liz, love the show. This is Luke from Reno, Nevada, and I just want to know, will Jerry Jeudy or George Pickens outscore DK Metcalf this year? Is that a hot take? I don't know. You tell me. Have a good one.
This year, interesting little caveat there. Jeff, thoughts?
I think it's a little bit of a hot take. I mean, I would say Jeudy probably has the slightly better chance if there's stability at quarterback. George Pickens is so up and down week over week. Some weeks are going to be big, some weeks aren't. But DK Metcalf, he's seeing all the targets. Now, my one major concern, he had 83 receiving yards this past week. 73 came after the catch. That is not sustainable. Aaron Rodgers averaging just 4.3 air yards per throw. Not a good number. They need to go vertical a little bit more. DK needs to open things up a little bit that way, but they were running 2 wide receiver sets most of the whole game, right? It was him and Austin. There was nobody else out there. Ben Skoranek played 10 snaps in that game. Like, he was their third leading snap player out of the wide receivers. So there's plenty of volume there as long as Rodgers can keep it going, but I would like to see him throw it downfield a little more. So no, I don't think either of those guys outscore DK Metcalf.
Yeah, I think ultimately I love the point that you made about George Pickens. He does just have one of those boomer bust type skill sets. We'd like to see that even out in Dallas, and there's potential for that, but I don't know how realistic that is. And Jerry Jeudy, you're asking for stability under center in Cleveland. Nothing that has come before this moment has hinted at that as a possibility. So I'm not buying, and also, like, Jerry Jeudy may not be the team's wide receiver 1. And we know that George Pickens is not the team's wide receiver 1. We do know that DK Metcalf is. And therefore, while I agree with Jeff, and I love that stat about his after the catch production, there is just not a high enough floor, frankly, on Jeudy, or a sustainable enough floor on Jeudy or Pickens to surpass what Metcalf will do over the season. But thank you for calling in, and I love that you are loving the show. Can you please tell our listeners and viewers where they can continue to interact with you after this episode?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. On social media, it's at Jeff Ratcliffe, and there is a T in there. If you Google me, no, I did not play professional lacrosse. That is actually another Jeff Ratcliffe, who Google has combined. The two of us now, we're one person to Google. Of course, FTNFantasy.com. Go check it out. If you want advanced stats like Aaron Schatz's DVOA and all of that, we have that over there, as well as great fantasy DFS and betting advice. And then you can listen to me on SiriusXM Monday through Friday, 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern, and then on Sunday mornings as well, 9 to 10 a.m. Eastern.
Thanks so much, Jeff, for joining us. Good luck in week 2, and I'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you.
Up next, when your head says no, but your heart says yes, Daddy, I Love Him is after the break. Now we're going to talk about a guy who was unceremoniously replaced by the team that drafted him, despite the fact that they never bothered to develop him or scheme to his individual skill set. I know that Justin Fields failed to record a completion percentage above 61.5% when he was the starter in Chicago, and we are all aware of the fact that he was a backup just a year ago. But you know what?
Daddy, I love him!
It's those legs, though. Fields reminded everyone of his elite rushing ability, taking off 12 times for 48 rushing yards and 2 rushing scores in week 1. And he did it against a Steelers defense that gave up the 6th fewest rushing yards in 2024. But that's not all. With the ground game humming, Fields was able to send it through the air, revitalizing Garrett Wilson's draft stock to the tune of 7 grabs, 95 yards, and a touchdown. Now, the Jets' offense does get a big test versus the Bills in week 2, but given how the Bills got trucked by the Ravens on the ground, Fields is back in starting contention, baby. He is my QB7 on the week, and you know that I really love him if I am starting him ahead of Kyler Murray and Justin Herbert.
Last call!
Today we learned that rational coaching can happen, that Jeff Ratcliffe is in fact not a robot, and that making mistakes makes us better in the long run. Remember, miscalculations are human. We can't beat ourselves up for not knowing purposely withheld information. We can instead take the new data at our avail and retool our projections. Big thanks to Jeff for calling in and playing along. And as always, to producer Dave for helping me remember our voicemail. It is, by the way, 914-348-1893. Be sure to check out my Week 2 edition of Facts vs. Feelings, the column that is live on the .com right now. Until next time, may your facts be solid, your feelings be right, and your bus, let them be someone else's problem. Three, two, one. That's a horrible clap. Hi.
Need a compilation of his claps from.
I have like pretty strong biceps. Better. Up next, when your head says yes or no, 3, 2, 1. Your head says no. 3, 2, 1. Done.